Welcome to Tips for Editing and Academic Writing. This presentation is brought to you by the ASU Writing Center, a part of University College and the University Academic Success Programs Department at Arizona State University. In this presentation, we will review tips for academic writing, including considering word choice, being concise, maintaining verb tense, and being intentional with active and passive voice. We will then review some tips for punctuation, including when to use a comma and some quick tips about colons, semicolons, and hyphens. Finally, we'll take a look at some strategies for editing. First, let's consider word choice. Why is word choice important in academic writing? Word choice can potentially show your reader that you are familiar with the language used by scholars in your particular field or discipline. You can demonstrate that you speak the language of the discipline. The words you use can noticeably impact the tone of your writing. For example, words such as first rate or best ever can be conceived as less formal, while synonyms such as important, significant, and valuable have a slightly more formal tone. Another example of informal words include towering, whopping, and a lot, which can be translated into an academic tone by using words such as extensive, immense, and immeasurable. Let's consider a few tips for finding the appropriate words for your paper. Aim to avoid using figures of speech, idioms, and catchphrases such as you can't judge a book by its cover or at the end of the day. If you're writing a research paper that will be read by specialists in your field, figures of speech and catchphrases might be perceived as too informal for academic writing. When writing for a specific audience or completing a specific type of writing, look for examples to see what kind of language is used. For instance, take a look at scholarly articles in peer-reviewed journals, lab reports, research proposals, or conference abstracts. When you're in class or in faculty office hours, you may also want to pay attention to your professor's word choice. Let's review the example here in red and take note of the bolded words. Tons of studies on sunscreen have shown that the chemicals used in these products have a very big impact on marine life. Research on marine life along the central coast of California shows colossal damage to growth and photosynthesis in green algae in areas that lots of tourists hang around. How do the bolded words, such as very big and colossal, affect the tone of the writing? What word choices can we make to shift to a more formal tone? Let's see how different word choices can affect the tone, as we see here in the revised example in green. Myriad studies on sunscreen have shown that the chemicals used in these products have a significant impact on marine life. Research on marine life along the central coast of California shows extensive damage to growth and photosynthesis in green algae in areas that many tourists frequent. Notice how the bolded words, such as significant and extensive, shift the sentences into a more formal tone that aligns with a more academic language. Now let's take a look at how field-specific terms can be used in your writing. Fields and subfields can have terms, or jargon, that are specific to the field or topic, and they can be unfamiliar to a general audience or readers less familiar with the topic. When using field-specific terms, consider the audience of your paper and if you need to explain or define any terms. You may need to spell out and/or explain acronyms as well as field-specific theories at least once when you first introduce a term or theory. Clarifying certain terms such as DACA, the Deferred Action of Childhood Arrivals, or WHO, the World Health Organization, can help your reader understand your writing and topic. When it comes to word choice, be sure that you are selecting and using the most appropriate word that fits the context of what you're writing about. That means you should be sure that you are using the correct word for your intended meaning. Many words sound very similar but have different meanings and will thus change the meaning of your writing. For example, the first sentence here reads, "In the popular fantasy series, the author makes allusions to Roman mythology." Note the word allusions in red, but the writer of the sentence does not intend to use the word illusions, meaning distortion or deception. The second sentence uses a correct word indicated in green. In the popular fantasy series, the author makes allusions to Roman mythology. The writer intended to use the word allusions, meaning to make references to something, in this case, Roman mythology. Now let's review what it means to be concise and how to implement this tip. Aim for brevity or being concise when it comes to academic writing. Brevity can refer to different aspects of writing: sentence length, paragraph length, section length, etc. And this can depend on your field, your readers, and the expectations of your professor as outlined in assignment guidelines. When aiming to be concise, consider if you have conveyed the same information more than once. Ask yourself, are you intentionally emphasizing key ideas, or are you unintentionally rephrasing the same ideas? You may be repeating the same information intentionally if you are reiterating your main argument for the reader. This adds value to your paper by keeping it focused. However, if you are unintentionally restating the same evidence in adjacent sentences or paragraphs, this can make your writing repetitive and less clear to the reader. Next, take a closer look and consider what words are necessary. As you edit your paper, ask yourself, does a word precisely convey your intended meaning? Are there repetitive words, and are they necessary to repeat the words, or can they be revised? We'll review both of these types of unnecessary words in the next slides. Reconsider using precise words. Let's take a closer look at being concise through the use of specific words. Consider sometimes when we write, we use extra words to stress a point. Common culprits are overused adverbs or adjectives, such as very, actually, or really. In the example sentences provided here, let's see how we can condense and swap out words to articulate our meaning in a concise manner. The peer review process is a very important aspect of academic journals. Notice that we start with very important in red. The peer review process is an important aspect of academic journals. Then we trim it down to important in yellow, which makes the sentence more concise but does not quite capture the intended meaning. The peer review process is a critical aspect of academic journals. Finally, we have critical in green to show that we can omit the adverb and find the best word for the sentence. When trying to be concise by avoiding unnecessary words, choose a more precise or powerful word. Word choice is key for clarity. Repetitive words refer to when the same word or phrase is used more than once close together, i.e., in the same sentence or in a nearby line. Repetition can sometimes distract the reader from your ideas or argument. Here's an example. Note the repetitive words in red. The behavioral experiment conducted over 5 days demonstrates that canines have similar behavioral patterns to wolves in their approach to conflict resolution. This finding demonstrates that we can omit or revise the repetitive words for clarity, such as the experiment conducted over 5 days demonstrates that canines have similar behavioral patterns to wolves in their approach to conflict resolution. This finding illustrates that to avoid repetition with your words, consider changing up your word choice and phrases, or even deleting unnecessary words to add variety and clarity to your writing. Now, let's review why and how to maintain verb tense. Maintaining consistent verb tense helps with clarity in your writing. Verb tenses explain relationships in time and contextualize events. You should try to avoid shifting from one tense to another if the time frame is the same. In the first example here, note the different verb tenses in red. In 1 week, Smith 2020 interviews over 100 individuals, was recording their responses in a spreadsheet, and sorted the data according to the reply to question A. Here we have 3 different verb tenses indicated in red happening in the present, interviews, continuously in the past, was recording, and in the simple past, sorted. This mix of verb tenses muddles the timeline of Smith's research, thus making the relationship between events unclear. In the revised example, note the verb tense consistency in green. In 1 week, Smith 2020 interviewed over 100 individuals, recorded their responses in a spreadsheet, and sorted the data according to individuals' reply to question A. Now we know that all the events happened in the past and are considered ordered in the list accurately. Common verb tenses in academic writing typically include, but of course are not limited to, the simple present, simple past, and present perfect. When writing your own arguments, general statements, or interpretations, and also when referring to the arguments, conclusions, and theories of other scholars, etc., generally you should consider using simple present. For example, in this paper, I argue that. Johnson 2020 asserts that. When describing research that you have completed, previous findings of other scholars, research that clearly happened in the past, etc., you should consider using the simple past. For example, we conducted interviews with participants. In the market research experiment, Gonzalez 2018 observed. In their data collection, Smith and Lee 2015 found that. When referring to general past research, some of your previous findings, studies that started in the past but are ongoing, etc., you may want to use the present perfect. For example, research on the effects of pistachio farming on water usage in California has found that. More recently, several studies on agricultural water rights have shown that. Now that we have looked at verb tenses, let's take a closer look at voice. Whether you use active voice or passive voice in your writing, you should be intentional about your choice. Choose the appropriate voice depending on your intention. Consider using active voice if your purpose in writing is to be direct, vivid, and concise, and or to emphasize the subject or actor of the sentence, i.e. the agent of the action, the main verb. Consider using passive voice if the subject or actor of the sentence is unknown, or if you want to shift focus away from the subject. Passive voice emphasizes the direct object, i.e., what is being acted upon. Consider your intention carefully when using passive voice, since it can make sentences more wordy or vague. Let's review some examples of active voice and passive voice. In the active voice, we have Smith 2018 incorporated new methodologies in his research on early childhood development. Most scholars consider Science and Nature to be the top academic journals in the field. If we change these sentences into the passive voice, we have new methodologies were incorporated by Smith 2018 in his research on early childhood development. Science and Nature are considered by most scholars to be the top academic journals in the field. Note how the main verbs and the position of the subject changes in the active and passive voices. In the passive sentences below, the object of the sentences is now the focus. Let's discuss some other considerations for using active or passive voice. Most academic writing favors active voice, but you may want to consider passive voice if you do not know who performed an action. The museum's archive was left in disarray after the 1950s. Consider passive voice if you don't want to mention who was responsible for an action. Despite the efforts of the journalists, the story was printed too late. Consider passive voice if you want to emphasize the object of the action. Almost a third of the company's money was embezzled. Consider passive voice if you're engaging in scientific writing, for example, a lab report or methodology or procedure. 1 milliliter of the solution was added to the beaker. Now, let's review some quick tips about punctuation. There are many functions for the comma, but let's take a look at a few of the key uses. Commas help to separate elements of sentences into manageable segments. You can use commas after introductory clauses, phrases, or words that come before the main clause or the main part of your sentence. You can use commas to separate independent clauses, also referred to as complete sentences. Let's see how we can use a comma to offset introductory phrases or clauses. Here are two sample sentences with an introductory phrase or clause. With their increased awareness about the harmful effects of microplastics, many consumers are opting for more natural products. When the brush and undergrowth have not burned in decades, the dry forest area is more susceptible to fast-spreading wildfire. How can we clarify these sentences with a comma? With their increased awareness about the harmful effects of microplastics, many consumers are opting for more natural products. Note that the word with indicated in green begins the introductory phrase, which is now separated by a comma from the main part of the sentence. Let's look at the second example. When the brush and undergrowth have not burned in decades, the dry forest area is more susceptible to a fast spreading wildfire. Here, the word when in green begins the introductory clause, which is set off by a comma from the main part of the sentence. The comma helps break the sentence into manageable segments and makes the sentence more readable. Commas can also be used to separate compound sentences. Commas can be used to separate independent clauses, which again are clauses that can stand as complete sentences, when they are joined by any of these 7 coordinating conjunctions: for, and, not, but, or, yet, so. You can use the acronym FANBOYS to remember the conjunctions. You can turn separate sentences into compound sentences using conjunctions to join them together. Here we see an example of 2 separate sentences. Scientists developed a microneedle to deliver medicine to plants through their stems. They tested the effectiveness of the microneedle by injecting the plant with drugs to observe whether it would prevent the spread of citrus greening disease. This can be written as a compound sentence. Scientists developed a microneedle to deliver medicine to plants through their stems, and they tested the effectiveness of the microneedle by injecting a plant with drugs to prevent the spread of citrus greening disease. Note the conjunction "and" in green joins the 2 ideas together. In the next example, we have scientists injected one group of orange tree plants with drugs to prevent the spread of citrus greening disease. They did not inject the other group of orange tree plants. We can revise this to say, scientists injected one group of orange tree plants with drugs to prevent the spread of citrus greening disease, but they did not inject the other group of orange tree plants. Note the conjunction in green, but creates a compound sentence. A comma splice occurs when a comma is used to separate 2 independent clauses in one sentence. Again, an independent clause is comprised of a subject and a main verb that makes the clause able to function as a separate sentence. A comma by itself is often considered not enough to show the relationship between independent clauses in a sentence. In academic writing, a comma splice is usually considered an error. There are several different choices you can make as an alternative to using a comma splice. Let's review this example sentence with a comma splice that divides 2 sentences. Many studies show that daylight savings time contributes to health problems. Most of the country continues to set their clocks forward and back. Note the comma splice is circled in red. Below we see 3 versions of the same sentence revised with punctuation and grammar that can join or separate into 2 sentences. You can choose a comma in conjunction from fanboys. Many studies show that daylight savings time contributes to health problems, yet most of the countries continue to set their clocks forward and back. You can incorporate a semicolon. Many studies show that daylight savings time contributes to health problems. However, most of the country continues to set their clocks forward and back. You can break the independent clauses into 2 separate sentences with a period. Many studies show that daylight savings time contributes to health problems. Most of the country continues to set their clocks forward and back. Colons, semicolons, and hyphens have various functions in writing. While there are other uses of these punctuation marks, these are some of the most common. Colons can direct the reader's attention to certain elements in a sentence, usually in a list form. Colons can link 2 sentences together. They can introduce a block quotation, and they can distinguish between titles and subtitles. Semicolons join 2 independent clauses that are related. Semicolons can separate items in a series or lists when the items are long, when there are commas used within the items in the list. Hyphens can be used to connect two words to create an adjective. Hyphens can also be used in certain titles. Here are a few examples of how to incorporate colons, semicolons, and hyphens into your sentences. Note the punctuation marks highlighted in green. The research group was comprised of scholars from many countries: France, Spain, Japan, Mexico, and Poland. Here the colon introduces a list. The methodology was fundamentally flawed in two ways. It did not account for participants leaving the study, and there was no control group. Here the colon links two closely related sentences together. Now let's take a look at semicolons. Biologists study thousands of different organisms found throughout the planet. However, most research is focused on mammals. Here the semicolon links two sentences together. Archaeologists can employ several different means to date a site, such as examining the topology of the pottery unearthed at the site, carefully considering the stratigraphy, or using absolute dating, including radiocarbon or thermoluminescence dating depending on the material. Here, the semicolons separate a long list that also contains an internal comma. Finally, let's look at hyphens. The 5th century sculpture exemplifies the transition from late archaic to early classical style in Greek art. Here, the hyphen makes an adjective, 5th century. The editor-in-chief of the newspaper takes responsibility for any errors printed. Here, the hyphen denotes the title, editor-in-chief. Finally, let's review some tips for editing. These are a few tips for editing your paper. Find patterns of grammatical mistakes that you might make. You can learn the rules behind your grammatical mistakes by meeting with a writing tutor at the ASU Writing Center and by using a grammar resource. Be intentional about when you use active voice and when you use passive voice. Eliminate unnecessary words that add little meaning to a sentence. Delete words that repeat the meaning of other words. Turn run-on sentences into several shorter sentences. Run-on sentences refer to having two or more independent clauses, so complete sentences, strung together without clarifying punctuation. Here we have an example of a run-on sentence. Myriad studies on sunscreen have shown that the chemicals used in these products have a significant impact on marine life, such as the research study conducted on marine life along the central coast of California by Lopez 2018, who found that in areas where many tourists frequent, there was extensive damage to growth and photosynthesis in green algae, an essential food source for a number of organisms along the coast. This is an edited version in which the writer has broken the run-on sentence into 3 separate shorter sentences. Myriad studies on sunscreen have shown that the chemicals used in these products have a significant impact on marine life. For example, Lopez 2018 found that there was extensive damage to growth and photosynthesis in green algae in areas where many tourists frequent along the central coast of California. Since green algae is an essential food source, this has had a negative effect on marine life in these areas. Here are some reading strategies that you can use to help you edit your writing. Please note that these suggested editing strategies should be completed after you have read through your paper to make revisions on items such as organization or order of paragraph, use of citations and evidence if appropriate, word choice, etc. Read your work out loud. You will hear and catch any phrases that might sound awkward or confusing. Reading aloud versus silently is one of the best ways to do this. Read through your paper and look for one type of issue at a time. For example, look for sentences in passive voice and see if you can change them to active voice when it is appropriate. Read your work in reverse. Start from the last sentence in your paper when you check for punctuation errors. By reading in reverse, your brain no longer focuses on the content, but rather focuses on the punctuation. Here are a few resources that you may find helpful. Credible websites for grammar and writing tips, including the Purdue OWL Online Writing Lab hosted by Purdue University or OWL Excelsior Online Writing Lab. Use an online thesaurus to make edits to word choice. Talk with your faculty and peers. Visit the ASU Writing Center. You can meet one-on-one with a writing tutor. The Writing Center operates on a peer to peer collaborative model, which means you can have a conversation about your writing goals with writing tutors, who are all ASU students from a wide range of majors and degree programs. Appointments are available online and in person. How to contact us. Hours and schedules for the ASU Writing Center are updated at the start of each semester, and you can see those updates on our website at tutoring.asu.edu. If you need assistance with viewing or scheduling appointments, you can also call us at 480 965 9072 or chat with us on Slack at hashtag tutoring-helpdesk. Thank you, and we wish you success.